Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I don't know if you can see us okay. Hopefully the tech's working. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, but it'd be lovely to find out who we have on the line here. So if you want to add something in the chat, just to say hello, let us know, give us maybe a word to describe how your day's going, tell us where you are, just so that we get a sense of who's joining us today. We'd love to see it. Oh, from Lisbon. Hi. That's amazing. International already. Hi, Sarah. Yes, soggy, it is the word. Hi, Nikki. Hi, Rachel. Oh, loads of people are here. This is wonderful. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Barry. Who have I missed? Oh, Bristol.
Everybody's loving the rain today, it seems.
Yeah, it's not great.
No,
apart from those in Lisbon.
Yeah.
or wherever else. Okay, so numbers are creeping up, and yeah, really good attendance today. So a few minutes into the session, I think we should get started. Thank you to everybody for joining us, and good afternoon and welcome to the second event of our series of webinars. My name is Matt, and I head up the contract team here at VMA Group. I'm delighted to be joined by two exceptional internal and change communications professionals today, in Emma Tucker and Jo Harvey, as they share their wisdom on all things change communications. This session is one I'm particularly excited about, as change communications is my specialist area here at VMA Group. Since joining the company a little while ago, the majority of people that I've met over the years and the majority of roles that I've recruited for have been either change communications focused or have had an element of change. So it'd be fascinating for me to hear the theory behind the change today. With regards to the order of play for the session today, I'll do a very short intro before the speakers go through their presentation, which will take about half an hour or so. Then we'll have a 15 to 20-minute Q&A at the end. So do feel free to add any questions into the little chat box or the Q&A tab throughout the session, and then we'll go through them, as I say, at the end. We do plan to end the session by 1:15, that's UK time, but depending on questions, as I say, there are quite a few people on the call today. Depending on questions, we may stay a little bit longer. If you're unable to stay for the full session, don't worry, and we will be sharing the recording on our YouTube channel. That's just VMA Group in YouTube, so that'll probably be posted tomorrow or early next week. So who are we, and why do we host these sessions? For those of you that don't know, VMA Group is a specialist corporate communications and marketing recruitment company. We do operate across the UK and Europe, though we do have an international client base. We have around 20 consultants who cover all aspects of corporate comms and marketing on a permanent and contract basis. So if you are ever looking for a role or looking to hire, hopefully we'll have you covered. Although recruitment is our bread and butter, we do post industry-leading reports, the next one of which will be launched next month, and that's focused on the UK internal comms market. And we host networking events, breakfast round tables, and knowledge sharing events such as this one. So why do we do this? We do this to share best practice, to enable people to learn and upskill, to celebrate success of all the amazing things that comms people do, and also give people the opportunity to ask the experts like Jo and Emma today. As I said, if you do have any questions for the speakers or myself about the recruitment market, then just add them into the chat. No question is a silly question, and every day is a school day. But cliches aside, I hope you enjoyed the session. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Jo Harvey, Head of People and Culture Communications at London Stock Exchange Group, and Emma Tucker, Head of Internal Communications at the ACCA.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, delighted to be here today and to kind of share my perspective on the relationship between change and comms, and particularly pleased that I get to do this alongside Jo. We met 3 years ago when we were both studying for our masters in internal communications, which was an incredibly intense time, brilliant but intense. But given that we're talking to an audience of comms people, I'm sure you're all very familiar of bonding through crisis. I think that's definitely what we did. But some of what we'll share with you today come from our learnings during the masters, and also from our experience in the field. I'm hugely passionate about internal comms and its ability to influence how organizations run and how employees feel about their organizations. I've worked in IC for over 16 years and managed all sorts of change programs, from kind of big organizational transformations to smaller kind of BAU day-to-day things, or HR programs, brand engagement, culture as well. I'm currently, as Matt said, head of internal comms at the ACCA, which is the professional accountancy body. I've been here for nearly a year. And before that, I worked at a banking software company, Temenos, and prior to that, at BNP Paribas, the French banking giant. And there's an obvious thread between these three organizations, which is finance. But actually, the really common thread has been change. BNP Paribas' strapline is a bank for a changing world. Temenos is all about transforming banks' technology. And ACCA really exists to equip accountants with the skills that they need to kind of help their organizations, you know, tackle the rapid changes that we're seeing all around us. So I think change has long dictated organizational strategy. And so my career in internal comms has really gone hand in hand with change, and that will no doubt continue. Jo, over to you.
Thank you, Emma, and thanks so much for getting me involved in this. So yeah, as Emma said, we met doing our MA. I really wanted to put a bit of theory behind the practice. I'd not done any kind of professional development before, and it was the beginning of the pandemic. We were in lockdown. I thought, well, what else have we got to do? Little did I realize what we were getting ourselves into. It was definitely something that was really hard, but something I'm probably most proud of. So if it is something you're interested in doing, I'd really recommend checking out the IOIC website. They've got all the details of what the MA involves. Today, a lot of the theory that we learned, we're going to be sharing with you, but in the way that how we take it to be relevant to us for a practical application. So this isn't hopefully too much like a kind of university seminar, but hopefully it's just about learning from our experience. Just a quick reminder, if you'd like captions, you can activate that on Zoom yourself. So if that's something that's helpful for you, please do that. A little bit about me. So I've been here at the London Stock Exchange Group, or LSEG, for just over a year. I've worked in really diverse organisations such as Standard Chartered and EY and Pizza Express, so really varied. And in fact, the beginning of my career was in restaurants. So I personally have been through a lot of change in my career. But I seem to have found this kind of niche for myself in people or HR comms, which is something I really love. So that's just a little something about me. Let me hand back to Emma and she can go through what we're covering today.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, so change and communication, you know, both of these things are a huge topic. So we won't do it justice today. But as Jo said, we're going to aim to share a little bit of theory and practice as well. So over the next kind of 25, 30 minutes, we'll take you on a bit of a whistle-stop tour of change, of the IC professionals' role in change, and what we've learned in our time in internal comms, and where we think the opportunities really lie for all of us to add strategic value to our organisations. So just starting then to set the scene. So this is going to be familiar to all of you, but you know, we're all operating in a time of rapid change, whether that's from geopolitical tensions. We are experiencing lots of populism. Nationalism is gaining ground on globalization. We're grappling with huge challenges like climate change. We need both the commitment of public and private sectors to take action here. Societies are navigating really complex issues like diversity and inclusion. Mental health issues are on the rise. And of course, social media has really changed the fabric of how we interact with each other. And of course, there's also economic uncertainty with inflation, supply chain disruption. People are feeling the effects of cost of living crisis. It's all feeling quite grim, isn't it? And then there's technological change as well, and depending on your stance, whether you see that as an opportunity or a challenge. But I think with AI seemingly being embedded into everything we do, I think that there's a huge amount of change. I think this is the point we're trying to make. It's all around us, and where we might have said once upon a time that the world was complicated, I think it's becoming increasingly complex. So a difficult environment to be operating in.
Yeah, so that all did sound a little bit depressing, but here we go. I'm going to try and lighten it a little bit. So first of all, this is the good news. I would say AI isn't coming for our jobs quite yet. I asked ChatGPT to give me an image of a group of a diverse workforce who were looking confused, and this was the result. Some of these faces are absolutely terrifying. So while we have really rapid technological advances, those robots are not coming after our jobs quite yet. And actually, they will never be able to cover the volume of stakeholder management and engagement that makes up such a big part of our job. I think I should add, actually, I think AI is going to be a really wonderful thing for us. And it's something for us to really freely lean into, so long as we're using it responsibly. In all seriousness, I think all of that change, everything that Emma was outlining, it just makes it incredibly difficult for businesses and individuals just to navigate what's going on in the world. I think workforces are building more resilience. Like, resilience seems to have been the word since, particularly since COVID. But of course, there is going to inevitably be a lot of confusion, a lot of unsettled and therefore probably unproductive workforces. I think there's also some really interesting research that I read recently that workforces are really beginning to lose loyalty, lack loyalty, partly driven by the sheer volume of change. I think we can probably all agree that we're not necessarily in a job for life as possibly we were in generations past, but a lack of psychological safety really can result in that loss of loyalty for employees. So we're definitely at risk of or making it harder for ourselves to retain that great talent that we need. So as a result of all of that, a leader might have these kind of faces looking back at them, although hopefully not quite so terrifying. So a lot of blank faces looking back, perhaps being unexcited, uninspired, and unmotivated. So enter the Internal Comms Pro. This is another AI generated image. I asked for an internal comms professional as a superhero. This is what they thought. AI thought it was. So this is a brilliant opportunity for us. If I go back to when I first started working in internal comms, we were probably pretty much seen as a post box, right? So maybe we put out organizational announcements or messages from our CEO, or we might have been like building the very first types of intranets. But so much has changed, I think, particularly since COVID, where change is pretty much accepted as a constant in lots of organizations around the world. We've got an opportunity as IC pros to really become recognized and valued more than ever. So how can we really build on this trajectory? Well, hopefully over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be able to address some of those opportunities. But I'd also really love, I don't know, Emma would love this too, we'd really love to hear about your own experiences as well. So please do comment on anything you're seeing or feeling on the chat. We'd really like to get your input. There'll be a bit of a poll later as well, so be ready for that. But we'd really love to see your comments.
Thanks, Jo. So we thought it might be helpful to kind of give a bit of an overview of the different types of change. And in the interest of time, we've kind of put them into 4 buckets, but in reality, most change programs will have an element of all of these things within them. But just to kind of explain these a bit, so strategic change is really about any shifts that an organization might take in regard to their strategy or their overall direction or goals. So it could mean them entering new markets or diversifying their product range. Brand campaigns would also come under strategic change. Operational change is much more about changes in processes and procedures. So it could be the introduction of a new HR system, for example. Culture change, we'll probably all have worked on programs around introducing values or changing beliefs or behaviors, that kind of thing. So it's anything really that's about the how people do things. So inclusion and diversity also would come under this cultural change. And then structural change are things like reorganizing reporting lines, mergers and acquisitions, or decentralization. And we would, and the theory would kind of class these types of changes as planned change. And as communicators, we then would see these kind of materialize as either kind of big change programs, which might have a kind of team of people working on them with clear, outcomes, clear steps to kind of achieve the business goals, and with executive sponsorship. But planned change can also mean those kind of smaller business as usual change. So the kind of bread and butter types of change communications that we often handle within internal comms. But there's also a concept called emergent change, and Kurt Lewin, who we've kind of sourced here, talked a lot about this. And that's really about this kind of spontaneous reactive change, and it can be triggered by external factors, or it could come from the bottom up. And I think if we think back to what we sort of shared at the very beginning, given the amount of change, the amount of volatility in the world, the fact that it's really hard to predict, we're seeing more and more of this kind of emergent change coming to the fore, which is why this kind of feeling of being sort of going through constant change is with us. And so organizations have really got to be incredibly agile in order to contend with both these sort of planned change and this emergent or increasing emergent change that we're seeing. And in turn, we as internal comms people have also got to be incredibly agile.
Thanks, Emma. So now that we're aware of those different types of change, what are the risks if we're not taking the right approach? So there was a really interesting book by an ex-McKinsey consultant who'd written really extensively about employee engagement. So he wrote a book called The Velvet Revolution at Work. He really talks about that shift from top down or command and control style leadership to a world of co-creation where employees hopefully feel more personally committed to making positive change. So Genevieve, it'd be great if we could launch that poll. Really interested to hear where you think you sit in your organization in these types of things. So we have 4 potential outcomes. By simply telling your employees what you can end up with, you could end up with what he would call hooligans, or people who may be deliberately disruptive. By selling that change to employees, you might have a compliant collaborator, he called it. So the audience won't feel like they're part of or own the change, but they're, but they will go along with it. Inclusion is where you'll have willing collaborators who've got enthusiasm and an interest in what's going on. And then finally, by really involving your colleagues through co-creation, you'll drive what he called personally committed reformers. So colleagues who really feel part of that change, who'll go the extra mile, who'll help bring other people on board with the change. So really interesting to see the results here. I can see questions coming, answers coming in, sort of sitting somewhere between selling and inclusion at the moment in terms of those. So we've got 10% of respondents saying that they probably still work in a telling organization. That's creeping up a little bit now. Highest at the moment is 38% for inclusion. So I think that's pretty standard. Selling at 33% and co-creation at 16%. So that's really interesting. I think there's always a place, right, for the top-down message. Maybe it's, around financial performance or something like that. But we have a role as internal comms pros to really be advising leaders that there are better channels to help employees really make sense of the change. So early engagement is really key. And if you are working in part of that planned change, perhaps in a change management program, you've got a real opportunity to add some strategic value to that change program by really making sure that the approach they take can be around inclusion or co-creation. And ultimately, this is going to help you in the long run, right? So for your outcomes where you want to make sure that there's a really great level of understanding or awareness, or you're wanting them to do something, most of the time, what is said to our colleagues is often not the same as what they hear. So there's quite often a disconnect between the what's been said and what they hear. So by doing the co-creation, or at least if you're doing the inclusion approach, you're really doing yourself a favor in the long run. I can see Nicola's got a really interesting question there. Some examples of emergent change you can share. Emma,
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I would say so. Something like employee activism is a really good example. I think most organizations, when say the George Floyd incident happened, saw a real kind of groundswell of that, like we need to respond, and we need to do something, and organizations had to do something. And then of course that raised a debate as to whether they were actually entitled to have an opinion on these things, whether they should comment. So these things are never easy, but I think that's a perfect example actually of emergent change.
Yeah, and Claire's also suggested COVID.
Yeah, COVID is the biggest one we've all had to. Yeah, great,
completely.
Claire.
Yeah, so those kind of things that aren't planned for, but they come up and suddenly, they really affect our world. And then suddenly the IC Pro, we are the first phone call, right? If the CEO, they're going to pick up the phone, they're going to need to come to us. That's how important. Thanks, Nicola.
Okay, so another way, I guess, to kind of look at where you're, or I suppose whether you're playing this kind of strategic role, is to consider where your time is being spent. And this model actually comes from Bill Quirk, who was a bit like a god to those of us on the Masters. We did slightly worship him to an almost unhealthy point at times. But I think he does. If you haven't got his book, Making the Connections, then get it. But I think what Bill does is he simplifies what is often quite a complex world that we're working in. But this model is really great because I think it helps you to consider where you focus your time and attention. And it's not to say that the things that are kind of the more tactical aren't important. Often they're fundamental to our role in internal comms, and we have to get this kind of stuff right to be credible. But the point is really don't spend so much time in those quadrants that you don't have the time to kind of be the more strategic advisor, if that's what you want to be seen as. So make sure you're dedicating time to doing that sort of coaching and consulting as well.
Jessica's raised her hand. I'm hoping she's able to ask us a question.
We should be able to allow her to talk, Jo. I know.
Is that working?
Yeah, I don't know. Here's Jessica, yeah. Unless you did it by accident.
Oh, yeah.
Which is always the
well, no, sorry, Jessica. I didn't mean to call you out. I genuinely thought you had a question. But Christian had a really good point where he said there's probably a mix of roles, or a mix of approaches, maybe depending on the type of change. I think that's really interesting, because I'm trying to think of a scenario where there's a type of change where telling would be the best option. And I'm not sure I can think of one. I'd love it if you could think of an example. I think the way that the world is moving towards the way employees have expectations at work, I do think probably an inclusive or co-creation. A safety issue, telling, Rachel or Raquel, yeah, that's possible. But I think you also would then need them to understand what is still in it for them and what's their emotional connection to it. So
I think sometimes as well, it's a time issue, isn't it? So
yeah,
it is often quicker just to tell people.
yeah,
But it can be, you know, a false friend in that way, in that it feels quicker in the short term just to have made a decision and tell people and then expect them to go along with it. But actually, it might take you longer to embed that change in the long run. But yeah, I think, look, with again, with everything we do in comms, nothing is entirely binary. So I think it's always about asking those questions. These are kind of helpful lenses to look at stuff, if anything.
yeah.
So you can use them in that way.
Yeah, I love all the suggestions coming in the chat. Very, really, really interesting examples. It's really interesting to hear about everyone else's experiences. Thank you. Keep it up. We love it.
Okay, so we thought we'd capture some areas where we think IC professionals can create a bit more strategic value. And it's predominantly about the relationship that you have with your senior leadership team. Again, during our masters, we came across a fantastic piece of research on outstanding leadership by Tamkin et al. And it really talks about how these outstanding leaders understand that talk is work. So they really dedicate time to getting to know people, to understand their motivations. And we as comms people can really help that process. So it could be that we help our leaders to kind of find their own authentic voice, or facilitate opportunities for them to have conversations with people. It's also about encouraging them to kind of listen to the different voices and get curious, you know, and really improve their own understanding. We can also play a role when it comes to coaching managers by giving them lots of data and feedback from people that, you know, that we're hearing through change, be that from kind of surveys or through any comms champion networks. So we definitely have a role to play in building that sort of coaching capacity that we can play, but also that managers can adopt as well. The research also said that great leaders really need to be able to paint a compelling picture of the future. And I think being able to articulate a vision, again, isn't going to be new to everybody on this call. We're all familiar of the importance of doing that. But it's really ensuring that that vision chimes with the organizational values and it really resonates with employees. And again, you know, we can play that role of kind of feeding back what our audience are saying to kind of test that vision. And leaders need to keep painting this picture of the future and sharing stories of how the vision is coming to life. So we can really help them by, you know, either helping them to kind of craft these compelling stories, and making sure that they're reinforcing those stories at every opportunity. And I think we can also help articulate the vision just by getting different leaders in the organization to kind of come together, sit down and work out what key messages are, because it's amazing, and I'm sure people have had this experience, that people working on the same program will have different perceptions as to what the key outcome should be. So I think we can play a role by getting them all in a room, getting them to listen to each other and agree on what that vision actually is. And I think, you know, communicating change is something that, you know, we need to kind of make sure we anchor it in the organization's purpose and on the why things are happening. As Jo said, you know, to help people kind of make sense of things, and they'll make sense of things in their own time, in their own way. So anything we can do to help that is really important. Outstanding leaders also develop people around them, and this kind of leads on from what we were saying about the John Smythe work, in that the more you can involve people in decision making, the more you can include them, the more committed they'll become to an idea. And their involvement will also help them to make sense of what's going on. So again, as comms people, we can create those opportunities, whether it's by setting up champion groups to kind of foster that conversation, or being that kind of conduit between the program team and the people who are impacted. So we can, set up those listening opportunities and ensure that managers, not just those people in the program, but managers are having that ongoing conversation with their team. And then the last one about embracing new ways of working, I think what the outstanding leadership research really showed is that these leaders really deliver on their promises and kind of act as role models for their organisation. And again, I think we can be that, if you like, sense check on that for our leaders, and we can make sure that they're actually living up to what they want the people around them to do as well. And we can help them embrace other ways. So, potentially depending on the change, if it's a case of kind of adopting new technologies, we can help them get familiar with those, or we can introduce different ways of interacting with people through things like Ask Me Anything sessions, having those kind of nice informal conversations. So there's no shortage of roles for us to play, I think.
Some of the challenges I've had in getting leaders I've worked with to like embrace something like Viva Engage or the Ask Me Anything, it's quite, but it's a really important thing to be able to do, to make sure that you're actually talking to your people where they are in the way that they want to receive their information. There's been loads more comments in the chat, which is really great to see, about perhaps in terms of those different approaches. When there's a merger or acquisition, you have to start with the telling, which is absolutely true, but then move into co-creation. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good one. Crisis comms and then following up. So yeah, agree. Some really, really interesting thinking there. So thank you so much. I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience at LSEG. The London Stock Exchange Group, or LSEG, we're fairly new in our current form, right? So we had a really big acquisition in 2021 with a data and analytics firm called Refinitiv. So we went from predominantly being a stock exchange to suddenly actually being this big data and fintech firm. We went from 5,000 employees up to 25,000 overnight. So as you can imagine, over the past a couple of years, an absolutely enormous amount of work just in terms of integration and bringing these two organizations together. So lots of work behind the scenes and sort of harmonizing processes. So lots of change comms regarding that. But now we're sort of into the third year, we're really seeing this shift. So we're really looking, or our CEO has set a very clear strategy for us to really maximize the opportunities that, as our new firm in our new format, what we can do. So we're really looking to transform our industry, and there's really, really big ambitions, which is great. It means it's a really exciting place to work. Within internal comms, then we've got a really, really important job, because we have to make sure that everyone is absolutely crystal clear on our purpose, our culture, and our strategy. We're really looking to build our reputation as an employer, and we've got to try and reduce a lot of the noise that comes with a lot of change. So that means being a really cohesive team. Last year in particular was a sort of cultural transformation, or cultural change, that Emma referred to earlier. And you can see we've got our 4 values here: integrity, partnership, excellence, and change. Proud to say that it was very much a co-creation effort. So we involved people at every stage. We had workshops, surveys, culture champions, all the normal things that you'd expect to see. And the goal was really to provide clarity in this fairly new form of the organization, of the expectations of our colleagues, but also specifically as well their managers or people leaders, and how we're expecting them to behave. And that's really seen as a huge growth driver for us. And you can see one of our values actually is change. And that's probably been the toughest to build an understanding around, and for people to try and make sense of, because it could mean so many different things. And I think a lot of people at the beginning were like, well, how can change be a value? But actually it covers so much about what's happening across our organization right now. So it's not just in terms of the new products and the new technologies that we're working on and the new markets that we're creating, but also around this cultural change. So really embedding a growth mindset, staying curious, finding opportunities in complexity. And they really, really see this as a really important growth driver for us as an organization. So what does that mean for us in internal comms? Obviously, you know, we have to build up a level of understanding, but we really need to lean into that storytelling, consistency of message, and really leverage our role as influencers to make sure that the leaders are role modeling the values and actions. So all those points that Emma was just talking about. Hillary's asked a really great question. How are you measuring cultural change at LSEG? That's really interesting question. So we still do the classic annual survey, and then we're actually introducing a pulse survey to a targeted population to really measure that cultural change. And we're doing that quarterly because we want to really see the shift in how things are going. So much happens within our organization every 3 months. So I think that's going to be a really interesting one. And certainly we set very firm divisional objectives, and we have very strict KPIs around that. So and we are a data and analytics firm after all, so the measurement is absolutely critical. I think there were a couple more questions that came in.
Yeah, Gemma asked about on reflection of the change of the integration that you've been through, what worked best on how you sort of handled it.
Oh, that's a really good one. You know, I think the real unlocker was when the two organizations first came together, the wording that was put out around the strategy and what the culture was. They produced what they called a cultural intent of like where we were moving to, and they gave a strategy and a purpose that was very hard for people to visualize. It felt like such a far off dream. People couldn't quite grasp what it meant. And you know, it's so important to be in a purpose-driven organization. It means so much to the culture. I think what really unlocked it last year was a really clear narrative on our journey, progress made to date, but also setting the real vision of what we were going to become. And it really has built a huge amount of excitement. We did a great event at the beginning of September last year. It was a sort of a global broadcast, but we really tried to do it in a very different and inclusive and involving global way. And we did we measured the impact of that. And in terms of, we had in the high 80s and early 90s, suddenly this level of understanding of people really getting what it was that we were trying to do. And I'd say that was probably the best thing that we were able to do. Oh, and Fleur Strong has recommended Hilary Scarlett's book, Neuroscience for Organizational Change. We got that
was a popular one as well. Yeah,
it's a big book though. I remember it being a big heavy book, but yeah, really interesting in terms of co-creation. Fleur, thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe we should put a little reading list together.
Yeah, I think we should. Okay, so I thought what might be helpful to do at this point was to share some of the things that I try to keep in mind when I'm working on change programs, regardless of their size or their scope. And I've kind of captured these in sort of three things really. So consistency is really crucial, and that's being consistent about how you approach any change projects. And of course, that doesn't mean that all projects are the same, and the volume of the support that you provide will differ depending on the scale and the complexity of the project. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that the principles that you apply should remain the same, and these will be familiar to you. So, you know, it's always about thinking about your employees first. What do they need? How do they feel? What do they need to know? What are they telling you? So really thinking audience first, being really clear. I mean, Jo just gave a great example there of, once you provide that clarity and people can kind of get their head around it, then it can make all the difference. So, having a really good understanding of what you're communicating and keeping your messages clear and simple, making it really compelling, so giving that context, explaining why change is happening. So this is really, kind of bread and butter stuff for us. But my point is, if you're consistent with your change projects in the way that you're consistent with everything else, then that helps you to build the trust with your stakeholders and with leaders. And inevitably, for most of us, we'll be working on these big projects alongside kind of smaller change as well. So the more consistent you can be, I think the more influence you can have. And then the second one, really about relationships. I think this is a good rule generally, is to worry less about the output that you're having and more about the relationships that you've got. Because particularly if you're staying in a company, you want those relationships to work for you over the long term. And it's the relationships not only with the project team and your stakeholders, but also with the people that are impacted by the change, because they're much more likely to be honest and tell you what's going on, if you've got their trust as well. And plus, if you're working with good people and they like you, it makes the whole thing a lot more enjoyable as well. And that kind of builds on my last point, which is, don't go it alone. Often in IC, we're teams of one as well, and it can feel quite isolating. But use your team, use your leadership team as well. Use the projects, use the employees, and keep iterating what you're doing. Again, kind of what Jo said just now is really interesting. That LSEG went out with an initial strategy, initial vision that didn't quite resonate, but actually it's really hard to reach that perfect point that actually everybody goes, oh right, I get it now. It is a process. It is a constant process of meaning making and meaning taking in what we do in comms. So I think that ability to iterate your plans and bring people with you is really crucial, and hopefully keeps you a bit sane in the process as well. So I hope that's been helpful to you, Jo. I don't know whether there's been any other comments or questions.
Well, Mariana's asked a really good question, and I think you've got a really good answer to this one, which was, can you give an example when change hasn't worked well and what you learned or did differently the next time, without naming names?
So I think it's often change. I think the problem is that often people don't think about things fully end to end. So I've experienced a change program where it was a huge change. Like, it was everything from the kind of the products and the way we were selling those products. It was impacting so many people, and really it needed a full plan around it. And yet it was kind of treated a bit more like an emergent change program. So actually, I think the role we had to play in comms was to be really reactive to things and kind of manage that, if you like, chaos as we went, and be really agile. So in a way, it was kind of we made the best of it, but actually I think in that situation, something with a bit more planning, where we could map out all the stakeholders, that you've got a clear sense of what change is happening when and who it's impacting, can be really helpful. And I would say, sort of conversely to that, where I'm at ACCA at the moment, we have a huge change program going on for a digital transformation, and it is being planned to within an inch of its life. And I think that the challenge there is to make sure that we don't lose the agility. So I think it's I'm not sure I've ever worked on a completely successful change program, but they all have their little different elements, I'd say.
Great. I think we're at time. It's
I know
been
we've talked too
amazing. We had
much,
so
but-
many questions.
We are indeed. I just wanted to jump in firstly to say thank you, Emma and Jo. A really, comprehensive presentation there. I mean, you can just see by the level of interaction throughout of the engagement, and the fact that what you were saying was really landing really well, resonating with people that are going through the same thing or just needing that little bit of advice. So thank you again. That, as I say, we've got just shy of 100 people on the call already. You are welcome to stay around if you have got any final questions. What else did I actually had a question for you, Jo? And it was the weird, creepy faces that made me think, what AI program are you using? Because that may be one to avoid for
I know.
everybody
Well, that
looking
was
at doing that.
ChatGPT. I thought that was a good standard one to use. But I
Okay,
agree.
well,
It's
maybe in
all
a
about
few
the
years.
prompts you give it, though, isn't it? So
Yeah, that's
But
true.
no, again, you've answered everything there, and really comprehensive. Thank you again to everyone for joining today. We had just over 100 people at one stage, which is the biggest one. We've hosted at VMA Group for quite some time, and yeah, Emma and Jo, a lot of time that goes into this presentation. So I do appreciate you taking the time to do all of that. Keep an eye out, everybody, for the next webinar. We'll be hosting that at the end of March. That's on crisis communications. We'll have a crisis communications webinar. If you would ever like to speak at a future event, do let me know. We do cover all sorts of different topics, and I think that is it from us.
I will just say, I think a couple of people are interested in a reading list. So Matt, maybe we can share it through LinkedIn.
Yeah, or in your recording, if you're issuing out a recording, we can pull it together.
Yeah,
and go into that email.
Definitely. And I don't know, from your time studying the masters, are there any kind of academics or thought leaders that you know off the top of your head that you can suggest to people to do a bit of a Google search? I mentioned a few on the call.
Yeah, Liam Fitzpatrick is great. Jenny Field, Bill Quirk, the legend that is. Yeah, John Smythe, The Velvet Revolution. Like, that's actually a sort of, you can read that as it's not like seriously academic. Those are the ones I could think of.
Yeah,
awesome.
There's loads. I think we'll pull together a list, but I'd say they would be my favourite.
Yeah.
And someone mentioned the Hilary Scarlett one. I think that was a good one as well. But yeah, our reading lists were huge, and it was the academic papers that terrified us the most, I think, Jo, wasn't it?
For sure.
Although by the sounds of it, you'd very much recommend the masters.
Oh yeah, I would, like with a health warning, but yes, it was brilliant.
And we'll pop them in when we put it on the YouTube account. We can always put the reading list in the comments as well. So if you did want to check in next week, we can pop it there.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again, and wishing everybody all the best with your upcoming change programs.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.